Welcome back to another episode. Today's topic is student loans. Student loans. Now, if you went to college, odds are you had to get a student loan. If not, you were most likely working when you were going through college to essentially pay for your education, or you were fortunate enough to have a scholarship or to have your parents actually pay. But most folks don't fall in that situation, and they actually do have to pay for school. So, when you have to do it, how do you do it right to make sure you're not doing it the wrong way? So the first thing is, what is student debt? Debt essentially represents value that's owed, but student debt is value that's owed for an education. So when you go to school, and again, it doesn't have to be college or university. It could be elementary school. I mean, they have some private schools out there. Some parents like to have and exercise their options. So that might be in a situation, or that might be a situation that you're in. But in any case, I want to make sure that you understand what student debt is and what it actually means. So, like any debt, there can be good debt and there can be bad debt. Usually, when you hear student debt, you hear, oh, that's good debt. Don't even worry about it. Like, as long as you're getting an education, there's no problem in paying the money for it. And that's not 100% true. Sad to say it, but student debt you can have good student debt and you can have bad student debt. And unfortunately, that doesn't get talked about enough these days because when students are ready to go to school, that's the last question they're actually asking. What will this debt actually mean for me when I graduate? What will it mean for my life? How quickly will I have to pay it back? Will it put me between a rock and a hard place? So, when is student debt good? All right, I know I've given you a lot of things to think about as far as like, hey, is student debt actually a good thing or not? But it can be good, and these are the three things that you need from student debt if it actually is going to be something that's going to be in your best interest. The first thing is you're going to get an education for a reason. You're acquiring a skill. That skill needs to be more than the value of the debt. That's the big thing right there. If the skill that you're getting or you're getting educated on, if that is more than the value of the debt, that is good debt to have, okay? Because you're improving yourself. The next piece is the terms of the loan need to be flexible for the student. So in other words, you need to make sure that you have options when it actually comes to the loan and paying it back. Do you have options for deferment where you can't pay right now, but you're going to pick up payments as soon as you're actually able to pay again? And that could be, for example, if you're between jobs. There could be a forbearance. So right now with COVID-19 and some folks actually losing their jobs, they might need to be able to push those payments down a while or put them in forbearance, let them still accrue, but not have to start paying them back until they get to a certain point where they're employed once more. And then you also have a debt forgiveness. So some loans actually allow you to write off the entire loan together if you pass away early. And that's not usually something that you think about, but it is important if you have family that would have to essentially worry about paying off those costs if you weren't around. So with those are two. Oh, one more. So the student, third point, the student needs to understand what debt actually is. Unfortunately, that's probably the biggest one that gets missed, and maybe the second biggest when you consider the value of the skill. But if the student doesn't understand the actual debt, they shouldn't actually be able to sign for it in the first place. That should just be a rule. If you don't understand what you're signing, don't sign it. So the student needs to understand what that debt means, especially for them down the road in regards to repayment and everything like that. Now, when is student debt bad? Well, student debt is bad if you have the opposite or the reverse of some of the aspects that I mentioned. So if the value of the skill that you're obtaining is less than the value of the debt, that's not a good investment, okay? You shouldn't be losing money for acquiring a skill. If anything, the skill that you acquire should be able to pay off that debt in full and within a reasonable amount of time. The terms of the loan, they also need to be flexible. If they're inflexible, student debt's not good in that case, because what that's going to do is that's going to put the student between a rock and a hard place. And so you shouldn't have to make a decision over buying food for your family versus paying off a student loan, right? That shouldn't be something where you had to make a decision about that. You should have flexibility. So if there's not flexibility in the loan itself, that's not good debt. And then last but not least, remember we talked about if a student doesn't understand the loan, then they should have no business getting into it in the first place. That also represents bad debt. If you have debt and you don't actually know what it means, that's not a good investment for you. That actually represents bad debt. Now, someone else could tell you, hey, that's good debt and this and that, but if you don't actually get it and you don't understand it, you're not making the best decision for yourself. And so that's why I even had this talk to begin with, because I'm arming you with understanding what debt is so you can actually make the best decisions, for yourself. Now, something to consider, this is a ninja tip, is that when you actually take out a federal loan, you actually get lower interest rates, usually than private loans. And then you also get some advantages as well. You have the ability to consolidate federal loans into a fixed rate loan, which is a huge plus. And then you also have the ability, you have a debt forgiveness that is incorporated with all federal loans. Now, when I say federal, I'm talking about public loans. When you're talking about private loans, you're going into a different environment. In the private loan environment, you don't have as much flexibility as you do with the federal loans. For example, only about half the loans that are given, half of the private student loans that are actually given actually have a debt forgiveness aspect within them. In addition to that, the interest rates for private loans are also somewhat higher, and they tend to be variable, which in other words, they actually fluctuate based on what the interest rate actually is. So you are better off going with federal loans than you are, or public loans, than you are with private loans. So make that first on your list. If you have to go with the private student loans, make that second, but definitely get as much federal money as you possibly can to fund your education. And then in addition to that, look for scholarships. Gosh, there's so many scholarships out there, and most folks don't even apply for them because they don't even know that they exist. So make sure you're going through the process to figure out how you can actually fund your education. It doesn't necessarily need to cost you money, but if it does, you also want to make sure you're doing it the right way. So what is debt actually used for? Like, how should you use it, right? I talked about what good debt is and what bad debt is, but how do you actually make a decision on, should I use debt for this or not? And the whole idea comes from this idea of being an investor. Smart investors know that if they're going to make an investment, the return on investment should be greater. The very shrewd investors know that it needs to be magnified by a number of times, let's say 3 times. So if an employer is looking to hire you, usually they're looking to see, hey, if I bring you on as an employee, will my business make 3 times your value, right? So that's how a business person might look at an employee as an investment. You need to look at your education as an investment in the same capacity. How much more, or what is your return on investment for making this purchase for your education? What will it give you at the end? Now, I have 4 very simple, basic categories where you can just apply a simple test to see if that actually applies. The first thing is, will the debt that you actually use allow you to finance an asset that will grow without requiring your time? So if you can actually purchase an education and it doesn't require your time to grow, let's say, an asset, something that's bringing you in money, that's a huge plus. If you can finance an asset that can grow without your money, that's also a huge plus, right? Because that means it can grow and it can be self-sustained, and that's a huge plus. Doesn't require your time, doesn't require money. Those are probably 2 at the top of the list. Next, you have, can the debt that you're actually using finance a solution that gives you back your time? So if you actually normally would have to put your time into something, but you actually get that time back, that can be incredibly valuable. And the same thing goes for your money. So if there's a solution that can give you back your time or give you back your money in a way that creates a greater return on investment, that's huge. So definitely stick with that. And then last but not least, what's dangerous about student debt, right? So I talked about the good, I talked about the bad, I talked about what you can actually use debt for, but what's dangerous about student debt? Why should there be a red flag there? Well, the biggest thing that's different about student debt than regular debt is that usually debt is associated with an asset or something that, let's say, if the debt's not paid, they can take that away. The debtor can actually take that back. But in a case of an education, you can't really take back the education. Once it's put out there, that's like it. So the debt itself, it stays with you. And the biggest thing about student debt is even if you declare bankruptcy and don't have a penny to your name, the student debt stays with you. That's big. You might be able to shed everything else off, but if you make a decision about student debt, it stays with you until it's paid, right? So even in bankruptcy, student debt stays with you. So that's something really big that a lot of people don't know, but you definitely want to know. The other aspect is your return on investment is usually less than the investment itself. Education prices have skyrocketed, so much so that there's been a lot of speculation or a lot of talk that there's an education bubble. In other words, the cost of education is growing much faster than the actual value within it. So if that tells you anything, that tells you when that bubble pops, if you took out a really big loan and the investment that you actually put into your education is not panning out, it didn't give you as much back, you're still stuck with the loan. So the whole idea is don't overpay. Don't overpay. So make sure whatever you're investing in, make sure the return on investment is going to be greater than what the cost actually is. Third aspect is bad advice. It used to be, it was good advice to get into the best school you possibly can. I know my parents gave me that advice, but these days, that's not the best advice you can get. You want to get into the best, cheapest school you possibly can. When you actually make that decision, debt isn't going to be something to hold you back from opportunities once you actually graduate. You do not want that to be the case. You want to have as much flexibility as you possibly can because you never know what type of opportunities will be knocking and what those will actually require. Fourth, student debt is not required to be successful. Usually you hear that, if you don't get into a good school, if you don't do this, you don't do that, you're not going to be successful. Well, you need to look at the people who are successful and what they actually had to do in order to get there. And in a lot of cases, it didn't require college, university, or those particular degrees. They had something else that they actually went after, and they had a different process. And if you can understand what that process is, it could save you a lot on the financial front, or you just might actually have to direct those funds in a different place or a different area. But that's where you have to do your homework and do your research and figure that out. And then last but not least, if you make a bad decision with student debt, it does not mean your life's over. But what it does mean is that bad decision can stick with you the rest of your life. And anytime you make financial decisions, that's what you have to consider. That's the consequence. And so I want to make sure that you are well armed when it comes to student loans, that you have a good idea of what you actually need to do in order to make sure that you're making a good decision moving forward. Because debt is something that can be used as a tool, but a tool can be used, for you, or it could be used against you. So you want to understand how it works so that you can actually allow it to work for you in your favor. So, and ending everything, if you get one message from anything else that I've said today, get the best, cheapest education you possibly can. Because when you actually make an investment, you want to make sure your return keeps moving you up that ladder. All right? So I hope you enjoyed this talk, and I hope to catch you on the next one. Bye.